Our next bill is 5446 by Representative Place.
And again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. Sir, if you're ever available for writing my next testimony, I would definitely look forward to hiring you. You didn't hear me. Oh, I said if you're available for hire for writing my next testimony, you did a much better job of that than I did. Thank you. So again, Mr. Chair, this is House Bill 5446, which is an amendment to the Energy Facility Siting Act, which is the enabling legislation for the Energy Facility Siting Commission. What is it? Yeah, and it's Energy Facility Siting Commission. And their role is the primary overseers of whether or not a power plant should be built within the state of Rhode Island. And this legislation itself comes out from a request from the town of Burrillville, which I represent, and was put together by two very well-informed attorneys. And they took not only the legislation that was passed, I believe, a year ago by this body, which would also have amended the enabling legislation, but also took into account all of the testimony that was provided by the study commission that was held along with the legislation that was eventually introduced last year. Every member of this committee who was in the chambers last session voted for this legislation as it was introduced 2 years ago, and I would hope that you would support it again. The importance of this legislation, from my mind, is it has been since April of 2016 that we've been dealing with the current project. Our laws and regulations are designed to allow for an efficient, quick process for any kind of land development, both to the benefit of the developer and to the people in the communities that these particular developments are proposed in. This legislation starts the process to streamline what's going on. As of right now, the only folks that are benefiting from the process we have in place now, quite frankly, the attorneys. There's plenty of stakeholders in this state that just are getting dragged on and dragged on and dragged on. The emotional state that this is putting through everybody in Rhode Island right now is just unbelievable. And what I'm hoping is that this committee looks at this legislation and sees the wisdom in amending this particular act so that future projects just don't get drawn out like this. I mean, the amount of money and the waste of time that has gone on over the last 3 years is just unbelievable. And I would hope in your wisdom that you would consider the passage of this legislation. With your permission, Mr. Chair, I'd like to introduce Senator De La Cruz and also a delegation from the town of Burrillville who are also here to speak on this legislation. So first I'll introduce Senator De La Cruz, Senate 23, who is sponsoring the Senate companion to this legislation.
Sure thing, Representative. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Chairperson and members of the committee. As Representative Place said, I'm the Senator for Senate District 23. That's Burrillville, Gloucester, and North Smithfield. And I've submitted the companion bill on the Senate side. And these proposed updates for the Energy Facility Siting Act would increase public participation, municipal participation, and environmental protection. It would be expanding the board from 3 to 7 members for large energy projects and ensure compliance during construction and operation. I'm not going to talk any further about it because the town and the attorneys, they're going to really go deeper into what it does and can answer your questions at depth.
Any questions for these witnesses? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Our next witness will be Jerry Elmer from the Conservation Law Foundation.
Mr. Chair, if it would please the committee.
Oh, you want to go with your...
Well, I was going to say the town of Burrillville, unfortunately, is spending a lot of money on their particular
Go ahead.
witnesses, so it asked that we could bring them
Yeah, they're
forward
not on my
first.
list, though, so they should have signed up, but go ahead.
All right, I appreciate that. I'd like to introduce the Town Council President of the Town of Burrillville.
Oh, all right. I got
John
you.
Pacheco.
Hold on, we got, how many people we have here? Page 2, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm John Pacheco, Burrillville Town Council President. I was part of that study commission last year that the speaker put together to study this legislation. It's essentially the same thing. It's time to get this passed. It doesn't just affect Burrillville, it affects every city and town in the state. The town of Burrillville is well into 7 figures vetting the project that we have on the plate right now, and that just is not fair to any taxpayer to have to spend that kind of money to vet a private project. So I appreciate your time, and our attorneys are here who have drawn up this legislation, have been working on it for 3 years. If you have any questions about it, they're here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Who's going to be up next?
Who's going to be up next?
Leah Donaldson is the primary author of the legislation as has been submitted.
Sit right there, yep.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Let's see here. I appreciate everyone giving us this opportunity. My name is Leah Donaldson. I'm here with my partner, Michael McElroy. We're special counsel to the town of Burrillville, and we obviously strongly support the passage of this bill. This bill amends the legislation that created the Energy Facility Siting Board, which we call the EFSB. The EFSB has sole and unilateral authority to grant or deny permits for major energy facilities in Rhode Island. This includes power generating facilities, which we all know about, but it also includes natural gas distribution piping, it includes electric transmission lines, and it includes electric substations. The EFSB permitting process affects every town and city in Rhode Island. The EFSB enabling legislation, as it currently exists, it was enacted over 30 years ago. It's currently outdated, and it's inadequate for what we need as a state. Right now, public participation is limited. City and town resolutions supporting or opposing a facility can be ignored. The state environmental goals are not prioritized. Incomplete applications can be accepted, which creates unnecessary expense and delays while stakeholders and agencies pursue essential information from an applicant. Host cities and towns can be excluded due to budgetary concerns. Regulatory enforcement options for existing energy facilities are limited. And this bill will improve the EFSB permitting process in many ways. As was mentioned last year, the House passed a similar bill. And of course, prior to that, there was the Special Legislative Commission. The current bill that you have in front of you is, we began with the language that passed last year, and we have introduced additional aspects that were concerns that were brought up during the Special Legislative Commission. So we wanted to make sure, for example, there were some state agencies that had certain concerns that weren't addressed in last year's bill, and we have integrated as much of that language as we possibly can to bring in, to solve the issues that were brought up, for example, by the state agencies and other folks on the commission. Let's see. So as it was already mentioned, this bill creates a faster permitting process. This bill creates a pre-application process that's similar to any major land development, and it creates a review for the application to make sure that it's complete prior to docketing. It strengthens environmental protections. It makes sure that cumulative environmental impacts are considered. It also increases public participation. It creates more opportunity for public participation, and as was suggested by our state agencies last year, it creates a council for the public to participate in a formal capacity to protect the public and to protect the environment. The bill supports participation of cities and towns. It makes the EFSB consider anything put forth by cities and towns, whether they oppose it or whether they support it. It evaluates whether a proposed facility meets the host community's comprehensive plan, and it ensures the host community has a meaningful role, while at the same time, it leaves the sole authority to grant or deny a permit with the EFSB. This bill creates dual tracks for small projects versus large projects. This was something else that was introduced last year as part of a Sub-A. It keeps the current project process for small projects, such as a transmission line that might be running through an area, and expands the process for large projects like a power plant. If it's a small project, the EFSB remains 3 members, just like it is now. If it's a larger project, the EFSB expands to 7 members, which gives us additional viewpoints and additional expertise on the EFSB. That's just a short summary of the bill, and we urge you to support the passage of this. It was passed last year, as we mentioned, through the House, and we hope you'll again pass it this year. I'm happy to answer any questions, and my partner's here as well. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for this witness? Vice Chairman Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman. Just have a quick question, because when you were going through it, I'm writing notes as fast as I can, and believe me, I can't write them that fast. But you had just mentioned about expanding the EFSB to 7 members if it was a larger project.
Correct.
The 2 parts of the question is, what designates it to be a larger project compared to a smaller project? Are there criteria? And who do you have as additional people coming onto the board? Are they specifically engineers, people like that? Are they concerned citizens? Are they who?
Excellent questions. They're both outlined in the bill.
Okay.
So I don't want to quote off the top of my head, so let me tell you exactly what the definition is. So the larger project has to do with, it'll be a power generating facility of 60 megawatts or more. So that's our line. So any power generating, you may or may not know this, but right now, certain power generating facilities, such as small solar or small wind, are not controlled by this legislation. That does not change. So small projects, which I believe is under 40 megawatts, still remains untouched by this legislation. Once we get to a certain size of a power generating facility, then we kind of go up to that. We're trying to more streamline the process based on our experience with the current project. The second question was, who else is on the committee?
Who are you adding on to?
So the way we have it outlined is that it would add, so currently the members are, as you may or may not know, the chair of the Public Utilities Commission, the director of DEM, and the associate director of the Administrative of Planning, or their designee. Okay, so that is how it currently exists. The additional members that were added, and this carries over from last year's bill, would be the director of the Department of Health, and the state fire marshal, and 2 members of the public appointed by the chief executive of a host community. One of those public members must be a resident of the host community, and one of those public members must be from the business community in that host community, but doesn't have to be a resident of the host community.
Okay, so a follow-up question then would be, because of your answer now, a 60 megawatts or more, and you made a comment that any solar platform is not included if it's 40 now. Is that going to be included in this now if a solar project is 60 megawatts or more? Right.
So right now, if it's solar or any power generating project that's less than 40 megawatts is not included in this, in the current legislation. Correct. It is still not included in this legislation. 40 megawatts is where you get kind of brought into the energy facility siting process. Okay. That stays the same.
So and I know it's going to be a lot for solar to go 60 megawatts, but if that happens to happen, they would go onto the EFSB now.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
What is it?
Raymond Trink. I think it's Raymond Trink.
I can't read the next witness, so I'm going to give it Raymond.
Raymond Trink, is it? Did we pronounce it right?
Yeah, do we pronounce it right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Yes, I'm a Burrillville Town Councilor. Two items. You heard about the comprehensive plan. Town of Burrillville was recently commended for their review of their comprehensive plan, and as the legislation sits right now, that means nothing to the placement of a energy producing facility in the town of Burrillville. That's got to change. Secondly, and we heard about the length of time. We heard it from Representative Place. The fact of the matter is, going on 4 years is not fair to anyone. It's not fair to the companies that want to produce power. It's not fair to the community. But I want to emphasize just one thing. The three-member committee is made up of 3 people who have extremely important jobs in the state of Rhode Island. And there are over 50,000 documents at this time for them to review. One of the unfairness, one part of the unfairness of the current system is that these people, DEM, statewide planning, and the Public Utilities Commission, these are big jobs with a lot of responsibility, and these people are the only members of the EFSB on this huge project and any other projects of this size. So it's also not fair to our government officials who, obviously this is a very important job, and they have to split their time between 2 very important jobs. So I'd like to thank you for considering this, and I'd like to also commend the committee last year who put forward many of these suggestions and then was worked on by our attorneys, and I hope you can push this forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Thank you very much.
Is Mr. McElroy going to speak?
How about Michael McElroy?
Are you going to
Is he
speak?
going to speak?
Okay. Okay.
Great,
All
thank
right,
you very much.
And what about Jeremy Bailey?
How about Jeremy Bailey? Hi, Jeremy. Welcome.
Hi, Jeremy Bailey, Burrillville Town Council. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. I do have to say, when I look at a bill, or any bill, in front of our town council, this bill that's in front of you today, I try to look at it as, will this help a project or hurt a project? And if this bill was introduced 4 years ago, I honestly don't know. I honestly think there's a good possibility we may have a power plant in Burrillville today because of how they set it up, and we really didn't know where the energy market was going to go. And one of the requirements for this bill is need. What's really helped us now with the current legislation and would help us with this legislation is the fact that we know that the need has gone down tremendously. The wholesale cost of electricity has gone down exponentially since this application was submitted. So I feel like this legislation, as our attorneys have drafted it and have worked with the State House in previous years, is a very thorough and fair bill. Another thing that I'd like to point out is the way this new bill has been produced or introduced, it would require the applicants to submit a much more thorough application. If you talk to our planning department in town and our zoning department in town, they will tell you today that they believe the application is so wholly incomplete that they still cannot even advise as to whether or not this project fits within the comprehensive plan and the planning and zoning of our town. And to me, that's unacceptable, which is why we're basically in this 4-year process, because we've been just going around and around, and part of this process is our attorneys being able to ask data requests. There has got to be at least hundreds of data requests because of the incompletion of their application. If they would have had to submit a complete application in the beginning, this process would have concluded much sooner, which would be, much fairer for the host community, for the labor that's involved, and everything. I really feel that this legislation is important to, I hope, passes in some form. Now we're in a sub-A, and I'm hoping that the subsequent bill passes over in the Senate. Thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Why don't we call Frank McMahon? He's against it, but Frank McMahon from the National Grid.
That's what I'm jumping on.
We are. He's a lead one.
Frank McMahon from National Grid. He's a,
Here he is.
oh, he is here?
He's here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Frank McMahon on behalf of National Grid. National Grid is opposed to this legislation as it stands now. as has been talked about, the bill places control over major energy facility applications and essentially puts that control in local agency and undermines the board's ability to balance the interest of all the stakeholders appropriately and the environmental health and economic impacts of the proposed facility, while allowing major energy facilities needed to provide reliable energy supply of Rhode Island be constructed in an expeditious manner. We've got extensive comments in the letter that we've provided to you, Mr. Chairman, and rather go through them all. The biggest point that we're concerned about is the vast majority of projects that appear before the Energy Facility Siting Board have to do with transmission lines. And the burdens that this bill places relative to notice, relative to public hearings and those sorts of things are completely outweigh the necessity for a transmission line or a substation upgrade. The power plant, like the project scheduled or in the process in Burrillville, very, very seldomly comes through the energy facility. There's very few of them. So the vast majority of the projects that they look at are projects that relate to transmission lines. And transmission lines are in no way the same manner and the same level of size and scope as a major, gas-fired multi-megawatt electric generation facility. So we've got a variety of issues, costs to our consumers, costs to our ratepayers because of notice provisions and public hearings and requirements. We go and we provide the public hearings and virtually nobody shows up, and because it's a transmission distribution process, not anything relating to what we're talking about. So we've got pretty significant concerns, similar concerns to what we testified last year. This bill's a little bit better than it was last year. However, we remain opposed, and at this point, be happy to take any questions if I'm able to answer them, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions? No. Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Moira.
I could tell. I just have a couple of questions about some of the footnotes in your testimony, particularly number 2 and 3 on the second page. Number 2 being that the EFSB currently conducts its hearings at Jefferson Boulevard. The dais comfortably accommodates 3 persons and could perhaps accommodate 4 or 5. However, with a 9-member board, arrangements and funding would have to be made for a larger hearing room. That one just seems a little on the small side. I feel like chairs are
Duly noted.
probably not that expensive.
I was not the author of this letter.
No problem. And then number 3 has scheduled more than, EFSB has scheduled more than 20 hearings, 20 days of final hearings. Although some hearings may start later and early, the typical full-day hearings at EFSB start at 9:30 a.m. and continue until 4 p.m. or later. As you can see by the number of people here, it doesn't seem to affect them at all. They seem to be totally fine with coming in and participating on their own time. I know that the concern voiced up here, which the footnote was attending to, was that it's such long hours that you might not be able to find people who are even interested in participating. So that's another one that I just don't necessarily...
In addition to that, the conflict of people who then are from the community, then the community has the ability to intervene. So it's a very cumbersome process as it's drafted. So in addition to the footnotes, there's lots of explanation about what it is we're trying to get at. I didn't draft that particular letter, but those are the concerns that the company has.
Sure, and
that's a list of
our goal as the committee is always to try to marry the voices between the opposition and the support. And so I'm hoping by clarifying these that if we realize that maybe they're not huge obstacles to getting us all on the same page, that maybe that would be a step in the right direction. Which brings us to the next one that says, the House bill does not specify how the EFSB would proceed if there were multiple communities, with some in favor of and some opposed to the project. And if you look on page 5, within the bill itself, it has the specifications for what happens if there are multiple host committees. Again, I'm not trying to shoot you down. It's mostly just that I think there's more that we agree on than that we don't, and that those particular ones may not necessarily be as relevant now.
That may very well be, and like I said, in the situation relating to a transmission line and equating that down to a power plant of the size of what we're talking about, they're apples and oranges, mushrooms and oranges, or apples, or whatever it was Mr. was talking to. So there probably is more commonality, and there probably is some way. We weren't involved in any of the conversations. We'd be happy to, but that's where we are at this point.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions for the board, from the board, I should say? I just have one for you, Mr. McMahon, if you
Yes.
don't mind. Have you been in touch with Ms. Donaldson to try and set up a meeting between the groups?
I have not. You might
National
have
Grid.
had talked to Mike Ryan. I'm not sure if you have, Michael, or not. Yeah,
Yes, no? No.
doesn't
All right.
believe so.
Well, then I would suggest that, if there's smaller details that you want to have amended, that you get together and see if we can hash it out. We can always do a sub-A here to make sure that it's a better bill and it's going to benefit everybody, including the communities.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McMahon. All right, next up is going to be Amy Moses from the Conservation Law Foundation. Is she here? Yes, thank you.
Thanks so much, members of the committee. My name is Amy Moses. I'm the Vice President and Rhode Island Director of the Conservation Law Foundation, an environmental advocacy organization. We have quite a bit of experience at the EFSB. My colleague Jerry Elmer, who's here with me today, is our lead attorney in the case involving the proposed fracked gas and fossil fuel power plant in Burrillville that we strongly oppose. So he has spent an inordinate amount of time in that case. In addition, I served on the House Study Commission that looked at the EFSB, and it was really a great study commission. We had a number of witnesses, including Attorney Donaldson. There was a lot of information shared. A number of other states have energy facility siting boards. Consulting groups have done reports analyzing what works, what doesn't work. As was already said, our siting board statute is about 30 years old, and it is in need of an update. Attorney Donaldson did a great job summarizing the bill, so I just want to make 3 quick points. First of all, this legislation is prospective. This would not in any way, shape, or form affect what is going on in Burrillville right now. That plant is going to continue under the existing law. So I want to make sure everyone's clear about that. This new law, if it passed, would affect future projects, not ones that are underway. Second, something that's really great about this bill is that it refers to the Resilient Rhode Island Act, which contains our goals for reducing carbon emissions. And we think that's really important that that is considered in citing future energy projects. We don't want future energy projects cited if they're going to prevent us from reaching our climate goals. And third, there is a provision in this bill to create a position called counsel for the public, and that is something that Conservation Law Foundation advocated for. The language in this bill, as in last year's bill, was based on the New Hampshire statute, and that really gives the public a voice at the table. Among other things, that counsel for the public has to consider environmental justice issues. So those are 3 things I wanted to highlight. We support the bill, and we think it's important that it be reformed. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for this witness? No, thank you very much, Ms. Moses. Next we have Doug Glebinski from TEC-RI is against the bill, but with written testimony only. Next up will be, what do we call, Paul Roselli from the Burrillville Land Trust.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Paul Roselli from the Burrillville Land Trust tonight. I'm also representing the Rhode Island Association of Conservation Commissions. And here's what this bill does. In essence, House Bill 5446 provides an opportunity that makes Rhode Island ready and open for business. That's what it does. It streamlines the process. It gets local control back into the game. It provides a level playing field between the alternatives and the business as usual model of fossil fuels. This bill makes Rhode Island open for business for new technologies. Let's face it, we can't go back to the past. The new 21st century infrastructure is where we need to be. And let's face it, anyone who comes to Rhode Island, invests in Rhode Island, needs predictable, reliable regulatory structures. And that's what this bill does. It streamlines the process for investors wanting clarity and emissions control when investing in Rhode Island. And it does one other thing that other legislation doesn't do. And let's be clear, over the past couple of days, within the House alone, there's been close to 246 pieces of legislation. No other bill than this one actually looks to the future. That's what it does. It provides a new language of how to interpret where we are today and where we need to go. It listens to health organizations. It relies on social justice groups and includes them in the process of this gas infrastructure development. Gives opportunities for direct input from the labor unions. When you've got 7 people on a committee, and 2 of those are from a host community, engineers, local labor unions, whatever it is, have an opportunity to have a direct seat on this council that we'll have to provide more chairs for. The IBEW, carpenters, painters, and other groups within the impacted community now have an opportunity, a direct opportunity, to be on that board. You know, my colleagues here today will talk about all of the other benefits of this particular bill. There's one here that maybe doesn't get mentioned, but should. And that's it, and that's that this bill is modeled after other pieces of legislation in other New England states. We're trying to play catch-up. This bill was modeled in part from the New Hampshire bill, which pays for people on the board. If you can imagine someone who would love to be on the board but works a 9-to-5 job and the hearings start at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, there is no way on earth that they are going to be able to be on that board. This bill provides for funds so they can get paid a little stipend so that there's some incentive for anyone in a host community to be on that board. Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, I've submitted 2 pieces of written testimony. One is pretty much a translation of a summary of what the bill says, and the other one are these bullet points that I'm talking about today. The last one is probably the most important one, and that is, we've been here before. Last year at this time, this bill made it through this committee, sailed through this committee, got through the House unanimously voted for it. It got to the Senate, and it's important to realize that once it got into the Senate, a sub-A was produced, and compromising language was put back into the House, and a sub-AA was produced too. So many of you were here during that time. What I'm asking you to do is to go back in time and look at that legislation. You'll find some very, very good additions to it produced by Attorney Donaldson and other state and other agencies within both the nonprofit world and the state agency world. And last but not least, Mr. Chairman and committee members, we need to look to the future. This bill starts the process of developing a new language in a warmer world. This uses that engagement to move our jobs and economy away from fossil fuels and towards energy production and energy efficiency. We don't have a choice. And this bill gets us to where we need to be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for your indulgence.
Is there any questions for this witness? Seeing none, Mr. Roselli, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Next up is going to be, looks like Nicole DiPaolo. She left. Thank you. Mary Pendergast. She left also? Well, I'll keep her on the list in case she is outside. And we'll just go to Elizabeth Seaver. Is Elizabeth here? Seems like a lot of people are leaving. Okay. And next one would be Kevin Descoteaux. Okay. We're going through this rapidly. Joel Gates. Is he coming? Nope, that's not him. Okay. Randall Rose. All right, we're striking out. All right, next one is written testimony only from the Rhode Island Business Coalition, and they are opposed to this bill. She went, I had Amy come in.
Yeah, but he was here. Does he want to speak?
He said that, he sent a message to Chairman that said he was going to have Amy speak on his part. Okay. All right, we'll go to page 2 then. Kendra Anderson? No, she had to leave also. Alex Kithis, I know you're here, Alex. Are you going to speak, Alex?
No, I just...
Oh, it was, you were just saying you were, okay, very good, thank you, Alex. Suzanne Dumas? She just left, okay. And I would assume Donald Dumas just left too then? Cheryl McCall? Is she okay? Is Greg Mancini here? I don't see Greg. Okay. We're down to the last 3. Sally Menzella? Thank you. Finally, thank you. And you're in favor of this bill?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you. I spent the last 3+ years being involved in fighting this power plant application. And the whole thing that struck me about the EFSB as it is constituted now is, as other people have made reference to, these 3 people already have jobs. And this is a tremendous responsibility that they have for doing, I mean, something that's going to really affect the future of young people, the entire environmental climate, not only of Burrillville, but the whole state, the whole region, and beyond, and that it should be a board with more representation from a broader section of the community of people who live here. They shouldn't be making the decision on their own, even though, yes, they're having hearings, yes, they're documenting everything that people say. But on top of all of that, the 3 positions, as opposed to the 3 individuals, are all nominated and appointed by the governor. And it seems to me as if that there's some possible conflict of interest there. I'm not suggesting that the governor has told them what to do, but I'm saying that there's something, to my mind, peculiar about the fact that the only 3 people making such a decision are on the board because of the governor, and that it needs to be broader than that. And certainly we need to have people who are environmentally sensitive and aware in a progressive and a proactive way to pay attention. I mean, it's very easy, I think, to get intimidated by these large fossil fuel companies. We saw that the governor, was sort of like welcoming them before it even entered the EFSB process, which sort of sets up that board as having to go against the governor. It was very peculiar dynamic there. So I just think it's a good piece of legislation because it makes the process more open. That's something we should be looking at in this state. There's so many times when we're sort of the butt of national jokes because we don't do it that way. So we can look to having a larger group of people who are more, maybe there's a little more impartiality there, which I think would be a very good thing. And I think that's it.
Very good.
I will be leaving now, just in case there's any.
You're not signed up any of the bills then?
No, I'm not.
Is there
Just
any?
making a little joke about everybody's leaving. I am too leaving.
Okay.
So
Is
if
there any-
anyone has any questions.
Yeah, any questions for this witness? Hearing none, thank you very much, Sally.
May I just ask, where is everyone else who was here when we started? Where do these folks go?
There are there is like 3 or 4 other committees that are meeting now, and some of them may be testifying on their own bills in other committees. I had to leave a few minutes ago because I had a bill being heard, and they texted me and said, your bill's up next, so I had to run out, and now I'm back. So they have been coming and going.
I have one more question.
Yes.
Is that because it's only a part-time legislation, and you can't possibly accomplish what a full-time legislation?
That has been debatable
like I'm
for
hijacking.
many years. That has been
Okay.
debated for many years. There are certain people that want it to be a full-time legislature so that we can concentrate 100%. We don't have to worry about earning money outside to
Right.
help our families in that. So if you can give me that answer right now, I would definitely appreciate that.
I'll call you. I'll call tomorrow. and
Okay,
tell you.
very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we have one other person, because the second name on here that was on here is a duplicate name that was on another one. Is Lisa Petrie here? She is here too. Very good. You are the cleanup hitter.
So I'll be brief. As a climate activist, I attended a number of the hearings in Burrillville about the power plant, along with hundreds of people from Burrillville who were extremely upset and concerned about how it would impact them and their community. They put in countless hours of research to educate themselves about power plants, health impacts, all the safety issues, et cetera, et cetera. They spoke out at one hearing after another, a lot more hearings than I made it to. And they went all around the state and got about 90% of the towns in the state to pass resolutions in support of them. And yet that was basically thrown out by the board. All of those resolutions representing thousands of people around the state were not considered, not given appropriate weight. And I think the people of Burrillville really did not feel heard. And so it's essential that we have a mechanism where the community can have a seat at the table. We need to usher in a new era of energy where energy does not come at the cost of the environment and or at the cost of our health, our communities, our livelihoods, where impacted communities have a seat at the table and no one has to live in a sacrifice zone. Thank you.
I see the hand up already, even before I ask, so Representative Walsh, proceed, please.
Saw the disappointment. Everybody thought this was about to be done. So one of the arguments that we always hear on the other side, right, is that people are constantly arguing, not in my backyard. And I just want to ask you on a personal level, if this were a power plant that were sustainable or environmentally friendly, say solar panels, wind turbines, something along those lines, I imagine that you, and I'm not asking you to speak for your entire community, but I imagine that you probably wouldn't have the same.
I'm from Burrillville myself. I'm from Richmond.
Right, so I probably wouldn't have the same complaints, issues, qualms.
Well, I think that's a great question, and I don't necessarily support every solar, large-scale solar array. I am a big supporter of solar and wind. But I think we do have to look at the individual project, and I think we need to design these projects in a way that it's not going to have an overwhelming negative impact on the community. And we should be having input from the community from the very beginning so that their needs can be taken into account, their priorities can be accommodated. I am hoping that the Green New Deal will pass so that we can start planning this kind of project together not looking to corporations necessarily to, to just come along with a plan, but really decide what meets our needs and where our communities will have also a share in the benefits, in the profits and savings. But I think at least this is a good step in the right direction.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative McEntee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to address Representative Walsh's issue, because last year we did hear from several communities where they were upset about solar farms, where they chopped down too many trees, and wind farms where the same thing happened. So it really is community to community. And even though it's clean energy, it like you said, not in my backyard, but sometimes to get to that clean energy, you take away all the trees and the topsoil, and many of the community members were upset about that. And then I think the windmills were too loud in one community. So there's so many issues with all of this stuff. But, you know, the community should definitely have a say in what goes in their area. So thank you for your testimony. Thank you for that question.
And I'll just follow up with you. There was a windmill or a wind turbine that was proposed for a community near my communities. And the biggest issue wasn't the fact of taking trees down, it was the birds. They said that the blades would affect the birds, the habitats, and everything else. And it was like, unless we have testimony like this, we don't know what's going on and how it could be far-reaching. So thank you for the follow-up. I appreciate that.
Unintended consequences of all of these things, I think, and we got to protect nature as well.
Right.
But thank you.
Thank you. All right, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 5446.